President Daigle on behalf of President Daigle and myself, welcome to our second AI Task Force meeting. A few housekeeping issues here in the beginning. Task Force members and technical advisors should be showing up as panelists in the Zoom. If you're not, please get in touch with Scott or Dan, who can promote you to the right place. A second point, or just a reminder that our next meeting has been rescheduled to Thursday, March 13th at 2 to 4 p.m. Dan Matz has the updated calendar invite, and now is a good time to check for that to make sure that you have the most recent information. So please do that. Check that to make sure that you're available for that meeting. The meeting is also being recorded, as you just heard, and you can access recordings of prior meetings on the AI Task Force website via the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. Okay, with that, I'll move on to the agenda for today. Today's conversation really aims to address two themes that we've heard from many of you. While some of this group are AI experts, many are newer to the topic and bring other expertise to our group. So for the first 35 minutes, Dr. Asuma Fayyad, the Executive Director of the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University's Rue Institute, will break down some of the core concepts of modern AI and discuss where the technology is likely to make an imprint on economy and society. And we've reserved 20 minutes for that presentation, plus 15 minutes for Q&A. And then we'll have another presenter, Cass Madison from the Center for Public Sector AI, and Nishant Shah, Nishant Shah, the Senior Advisor for Responsible AI for Governor Moore in the state of Maryland, who will help ground our work in the national context and share lessons from elsewhere in the United States. Almost every state around the country now is wrestling with AI policy topics, and so we're very interested to hear from folks outside of Maine what's going on. And they will together share insights for 30 minutes, and then we'll plan for a 15-minute Q&A to follow them. And then after the two presentations, we'll have additional time for discussion, 25 minutes, and the goal is to reflect on these presentations in the context of our charge to produce Maine with specific recommendations. And then as we wrap up, we'll invite Scott and Dan to briefly preview a follow-up survey that they'll be sending out for input on the task force and discussion topics for the months ahead. And that's very important for you all to participate in. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter, Dr. Asuma Fayyad, again, the Executive Director of the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University's Rue Institute. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. Let me see if the share works. Slideshow. Huh?
We can see it.
And are you seeing the slideshow? Yep. Okay. Perfect. All right. So I compressed. I was given the task of saying, give an overview, explain it, demystify it, which actually deserves a lot of demystification. Do it all in 20 minutes, while also highlighting issues for you guys to be thinking about. So it's a tough job. I have a presentation that's shared with you. There's more slides in it than I will cover, but hopefully we can kind of get to the core of it. Key themes to just summarize some of the things I'll be hammering on is working AI today is all machine learning, and we'll talk about the relationship between AI and machine learning, which means data is the most important asset in this equation. No data, no AI. There's a trend out there for these very large language models. We'll talk some about that. We actually believe strongly that smarter and smaller, not larger, is the right approach, and we'll talk about that. Talent and upskilling of the workforce is a necessity. It is not an option unless you just want to give up on the jobs. I think there'd be more jobs created for an AI-savvy workforce, which means we need to think hard about how do we put the mechanisms in place to get our current workforce upskilled. And finally, education in the traditional way will be disrupted. There's huge changes coming. And this needs development both in terms of, how do we teach the stuff, and more importantly, how do we do that in the workplace correctly? And I'll touch some on that as well. So some questions you guys, I guess, are also thinking about as you think about governance and policy and so forth. How do we differentiate in a crowded environment? Well, I say look for smarter, not bigger, and it especially applies to Maine. I think if we pick a certain area and go deep, which is my last point here, we can make a huge difference. And I think there are areas where Maine has advantages. So in the AI space, where should we invest? We need to understand, what are the depreciating assets and what are the appreciating assets, and really understanding, what is the pragmatic ROI is very important. Talent and upskilling, absolute must, like I said before. And how do we get AI adopted in the way we work? How do we actually create an environment that not only encourages, but makes it a necessity to use the AI? Because whoever does not use the technology now, I am convinced will be left behind. A few words, what is AI? It has a very simple definition, deceptively simple, the use of computers to simulate human intelligence, but really problematic. To this day, we don't know how to define intelligence to begin with. Many smart people over the past 100 years have attempted without getting a good result. And then even simple stuff like common sense reasoning doesn't work. It's still an open problem. What about machine learning? Well, machine learning is a subset of AI. It basically represents a whole movement that happened probably from the early days of AI, but now became the prevalent one, that basically said, look, trying to figure out and code intelligence is a hopeless problem, like writing algorithms to code intelligence. So why don't we use data and try to use data to say, here's how I get from the situation to the desired outcome by leveraging data. So very empirical. That effectively proved to be the right approach and took over everything. So almost all today of working AI that you see and hear about is really machine learning. It's really data driven. So algorithms that look at the data, learn from them, build models, etc. By the way, we've gone through hypes before, hype cycles. There was one in the 50s and 60s that got followed by a huge AI winter where there was disillusionment, withdrawal of funding, people denying they had anything to do with the field in the mid 70s. The field didn't learn. They repeated that again in the early 90s. There was a second big winter. And now we're actually seeing a resurgence that comes with also a lot of hype. In many ways, I would wish Elon Musk would stop talking. Since 2016, he's been predicting that in 1 year, we'll have autonomous driving in Tesla. It hasn't happened yet. Every year he repeats it. Most recently, about a year ago now, he predicted that AI will be smarter than humans. The year has hit its expiration, and we still are not there. I reassure you of that. So a lot of this hype doesn't help, but it's there. It's in the background, and everybody gets bombarded with it. And it really hides kind of the more important parts, which is this is significant. So throughout these hype cycles and winters, machine learning survived, and not because we have better algorithms. In fact, the core algorithm used in deep learning in this generative AI and the large language models, it was invented in the 40s. It became published and well known in terms of learning in the 50s. By the way, in 1958, when Frank Rosenblatt published his paper on learning in the perceptrons, which are basically the neural nets of today, there was immediately a New York Times article saying, oh, machine teaches itself, it will replace all jobs, everything will change. So we're still kind of in that cycle, although this time is going to be different, and I'll talk about why. So the big reason here is these are simple algorithms, but making them work in complex situation is kind of what drove AI advancements. So a lot of what you see is built on the fact that we have a lot more data between the internet and digitization. there's a lot, way more data than ever before, and therefore machine learning has become more powerful than ever before. So just quickly, AI, a subset of AI is machine learning. A subset of AI is generative models or generative AI that we'll talk about in a second. By the way, applied machine learning, the majority is what's called predictive AI or classical machine learning, which is still the majority. Unsupervised learning, which is when the machine tries to discover groups in the data and so forth, is also good applications, but smaller. Generative AI is still tiny applications. And of course, there's many other algorithms here you probably never heard about, etc., that are out there but haven't seen real applications. From a real application, keep in mind a lot of the predictive learning, the AI before Gen AI is probably the majority of what's working out there. So I grabbed a couple of slides from a bigger talk I give around the secrets of making AI work in the real world, in the enterprise. Number one is narrow the scope as much as possible. Make it so narrow that you can have complete knowledge about everything. And is this possible? Well, yeah, it's possible. In gaming, like in chess, it's possible to know everything about the universe of chess. And no surprise, we have chess players, cheap ones, that can beat grandmasters today. Unfortunately, also, this applies in many business settings, like controlled conditions in factories with robotic arms, like programming and data operations, and a lot of the tasks in the knowledge economy this applies to. And this is where the big difference comes in. And I'll talk about that in a second. One thing I want you to note here, this principle of narrow the scope as much as possible, that goes opposite to the philosophy of ChatGPT, where the whole idea here is make the model as big as possible, have it know about everything, etc. We actually believe that success comes from these much narrower, by the way, much cheaper, much simpler models, much more stable models, etc. So keep that in mind, that the direction the big AI providers have gone in is not necessarily a good one for the planet or for business, honestly. I have yet to see a business application where the one model needs to speak 80 or 90 languages and know every field of science out there or have reviewed it. It's not needed, but it's very, very expensive to do for a variety of reasons. By the way, Amazon launched this Amazon Go stores with a big fanfare. There was all sorts of articles about this is the future of retail. You walk into a store, you pick up items, there's no checkout counter, you walk out and your Prime account is charged. As an engineer, I used to always kind of walk in and look at the ceiling, and I'll see all sorts of sensing devices in different modalities. Two reasons I show this. One is this kind of sensing and machinery is overkill for, hey, did Osama pick up the right chocolate bar from the right shelf, and did he happen to return it elsewhere, or did he walk out with it? But the second part is a lot of this imaging and all of this stuff was being captured by teams in India, humans, who were actually analyzing what was happening and doing it. It wasn't AI that was doing it most of the time, it was humans. That's a good practice, actually. We call it human in the loop AI. And the hope Amazon had was to learn from all of that data that the humans classify because the algorithms can't. Of course, this didn't work, right? Because of, in my opinion, economic viability, Amazon shut down the business last April. It's shutting down the stores everywhere else. They claimed customers didn't like it, but I believe it's the economics, of course. So some of the big challenges for AI then is, getting the good training data to make these learning algorithms work. Reliable labeling of the data is even more expensive, like the data that was being sent to India. By the way, Google does this all the time with their ranking engine for search queries. There's an army of people who just look at search results and say, hey, move up, move down. This is not relevant. This is a meme. Just collecting and managing this raw data is a challenge, and it's growing exponentially. So one of the things to think about as a state, how do we enable our businesses to capture much of this data that today is not captured? Because that's really the ingredient that will power us in the areas we choose as our advantage areas that we want to go after, and I'll talk about some. That's very important, and that's very hard for companies, for hospitals, for organizations in general to do. So thinking hard about how does the state, for example, create the kind of conditions and policies that help businesses tap into that data is a big deal. The two lost themes in AI in general, data is essential. We talked about that, and human intervention is absolutely essential. So not only do you need to capture the guidance. Sorry, was there a question? Okay. Uh, Not only must you capture the data and the context of what's happening, but you must capture also corrections to this. The feedback, guidance, why did you correct it? What was the context under which you corrected it? And these are hard to do, but they're extremely important. And all the AI that you see working out there today is a human in the loop AI, where there's a lot of intervention, including ChatGPT, including many of these systems. So what can we do about this data? Well, realize that this is essentially in the equation for AI, there's depreciating assets and appreciating assets. Hardware and software investments are fast depreciating. You saw what happened with, and if we have time, maybe we'll talk about DeepSeek and the other models coming out of China. But there's even a bigger dynamic here for like much cheaper models that hasn't the market yet. But the real asset here, the only appreciating asset in this equation is data. If you have data and you've been capturing it and systematically keeping it in good quality, that is a very lasting asset that gives you huge advantages over kind of the public data in the internet. As an example, I threw in here how AI can help in healthcare and life sciences. This is a couple of our focus areas at the Institute. Probably most relevant to Maine are digital health, hospital at home. How do we track patients outside the clinic? How do we detect issues with an aging population? And when is it that we need interventions versus the current model, for example, of only seeing patients, once a year or twice a year. And then in between, we have no idea what's happening to them, and many other areas of application here for use in hospitals, in speeding up responses to patients, in aiding physicians in diagnosing and or making decisions. The institute is called Experiential AI at the Rue Institute, and Experiential AI is our code word for AI with the human in the loop. We believe not only is human intervention is a must, but human intervention is a great opportunity for knowledge capture and machine learning. So let's talk generative AI for a few minutes before I kind of wrap it up. What is it? Well, it's generating text, images, and etc. from a textual or multimodal prompt. Multimodal means here's text, get me something that's like this, and here's an image example, or here's a sound I want you to emulate, or a voice, or what have you. We in the technical community, these are called stochastic parrots. I love that term because these models, as smart as they may seem to you, they have zero understanding of what they're saying. But they are encoding a lot of that information and repeating patterns, and they're repeating it in ways that sound so eloquent that we think they understand, we think they know what they're talking about, no idea whatsoever. So keep that in mind, that these are just fancy stochastic, it's a fancy autocomplete on steroids, basically. If you feed these algorithm text, you get text out. If you feed it images, you get images out, like DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. If you feed it code programs, you get code out, like Microsoft Copilot. If we have time, we'll talk about that for code, because it's an illustrative example of what's happening dynamically in the economy. If you feed it voice and music, you get voice and music out. Same for short videos. Plus, you can feed it like really useful objects that are complicated, DNA sequences, protein folding, chemistry, physics, molecular design, and those come out and in fact can be very useful. What's ChatGPT? ChatGPT is essentially a chat interface put on top of this LLM, this large language model, which is just a huge neural network with a lot of weights. Typically, like with ChatGPT 3, which is the last time OpenAI was open, we know it had 175 billion parameters or weights in the neural net. And that's what you need to kind of train it on to converge. The chat bot kind of goes the interface, it modifies your input query and it modifies the answer to make it look very human. And that kind of took a lot of attention. If you want to know how it works, ask me, and I have a few slides on that. The capabilities are not new, but one of the things I want to say is it's not trained on the entire data of the internet. There's a huge curation operation happening where they manually curate data, they balance it out, they get rid of the stuff they think is contradictory or not right. A lot of biases are introduced in that process. But despite all of that, GPT-3, which is, circa 2022, was trained on about 1 terabyte of data only. But that data, at first, they tried all data from the internet. That didn't work. So they went to sources that are moderated, like Wikipedia, like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, a lot of scientific papers, books, etc. So training GPT-3 on 1 terabyte of data, text data, the 1 terabyte fits on your laptop, getting this large network, which today is considered smaller compared to GPT-4 or others, on this 1 terabyte of data, it costs about $3 million of electricity burning just to get the weights in that model to converge. And that's only to get them to converge. And that's not counting the cost of the hardware, not counting the cost of the curation, and so forth. So the newer model are even more expensive. I think GPT-4, every time you hit the train button, it's a $10 to $15 million electricity bill. So these are very expensive to train. The reason they got a lot of our attention is they went from 0 to 100 million users in 2 months, as opposed to things like Uber and Google Translate that took about 70 months. The economic impact, which is what matters to us and what is different in the story today, is there's several estimates ranging from 15% to 80% of acceleration in the knowledge economy. And for countries like the US, the knowledge economy in the US is about 51%, maybe 52% of the economy. So even if the speed up was only 2%, not 15 or 80, you're going to get a big number automatically. 1% of the US economy is something you cannot ignore, assuming a 2% speed up. So it's a big number. And that's what's different this time. This is not like playing better chess or playing better game of life or Go or what have you. This has economic implications in a knowledge economy that's filled with kind of robotic, repetitive tasks. And this is where this AI is going to have its biggest economic impact. So human in the loop is essential. You need to check the output always. You need to modify and edit it because often it'll come out wrong, and you need to approve it. You cannot sleep at the wheel when you use it, especially if it's making decisions or it's facing, people. Will AI replace my job is a question I get all the time, and I say no, but a human using AI will replace your job if you're not using AI. This is why it's so important for us here to think this through. Let's see, check time. Okay. There's many cross-sector uses here. I'm not going to go into them. I will just say a few words about what's been happening recently. We went from fascination to kind of measuring real ROI, etc., and some interesting results. We can talk about this in the question session if you're interested, but we worked with a couple of companies that have a lot of programmers who wanted to really measure, does this replace programmers? Is it, something that adds value, etc. What we found here, it turns out that the programmers who are highly skilled can be accelerated by something like 70% on average. If you're not skilled as a programmer, very well skilled, it doesn't help you. In fact, it hurts you. It will take more of your time to figure out what the machine produced and how to use it and debug it than it would be for you to do it yourself. So that creates a bigger gap, right? The programmers who know how to use the AI and are skilled, they are 70% more valuable in the market. Programmers who are not so skilled are 70% less valuable. And the gap gets bigger with the technology. So that's the importance of education and skills here. You may ask, why are these things getting bigger? From 175 billion to half a trillion to 1.5 trillion parameters, very expensive. And that's because these companies are driven by more cloud consumption. They love to have more cloud consumption. And therefore, they're motivated by a different set of criteria. I was going to cover, let's see, how are we doing on time? Are we out of time?
I think you've got time to go into one more section. We do want to be able to make sure that we give the opportunity for questions and answers. So,
Absolutely. I wanted to use this example here because it may be also relevant to the state of Maine. This is a marketing example.
Hi, it's me, Jennifer Lopez, Chief Celebration Officer of Virgin Voyages, here to invite you to celebrate. So come, celebrate
Your anniversary, your birthday, or just generally being fabulous.
Really, Kyle?
It's good, right?
Gen AI is supposed to be inviting people to Virgin Voyages, not doing whatever that was. Just give me that. What's I gonna say?
Why not celebrate on an award-winning voyage with Michelin-starred chef-curated menus?
World-class destinations, award-winning.
Boring. Been there. Hop right in that suit.
I can't watch this. Give it to me. There's no kids here. That's all you need to know.
Oh, can I live there?
Gen AI. Invite you.
So why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this for a couple of reasons. By the way, Maine as vacation land is, this could be amazing. These guys used it at Virgin Cruises to basically say, if you book a ticket, what if you got to send a message in the voice and image of Jennifer Lopez to your friends and family, inviting them to join you on the cruise? Well, it broke the records. They sold 1,000 tickets in record time. There's multiple reasons why they didn't launch it at scale. But the reason I show it is, number one, this is generative AI. So basically, this is generative voice. You record a message and it maps to her voice, and generative video. You make some gestures and it translates it to Jennifer Lopez doing. This was done, of course, with her agreement. She got paid for this. They stopped it because people started trying to get Jennifer Lopez to say inappropriate things and inappropriate gestures, and it became like a nightmare. But the reason for this is, fiction is kind of easy and amusing. We can use it in some serious applications, but we have to be careful. But the bar for generating like a deep, show me an image of an astronaut riding a horse in space. Okay, this is funny, it's interesting. But reality and fiction can be, this is an infamous video of this guy basically making whatever he says sound like it's President Obama. This is one by a bunch of hackers in Germany who basically could get Putin to say anything they wanted. This is another image of, hey, Trump was arrested in the streets of New York. Again, here, and deep fakes now, they went from taking a few weeks to a few months to being able to be done in a few minutes. And that's the scary part, which leads us to kind of thinking about regulation. How do we protect the population? The meaning of and importance of identity, like are we dealing with a real entity or not? We are heading into a world where almost we're at the threshold of, can you believe anything you see, hear, read, or investigate online? And that's a real threat to kind of society. Something to keep in mind about all this and why we care about responsible AI is, Google likes to talk about the term hallucinating. These models don't hallucinate. They don't even understand what they're saying, but they do make a lot of errors as part of their functioning. So keep that in mind, is they make errors, they don't hallucinate. We care about responsible AI at the Institute because it involves serious issues like reputational costs, regulatory issues, systems designed against us versus for us. And these are a lot of the things that we talk about, and we have it as a major area of focus at the Institute. I'm probably not going to have time to go into other things that have been happening in the field, so I'm going to skip these. The smaller models are a big deal because they allow you to do very smart things with much smaller models that are much more stable, less likely to make errors, and more importantly, can be trained as you use them, which is not the case for the large models. It's too expensive to get the large models up to date, which is why like GPT-4 is a snapshot from 2 years ago. They haven't really updated it. Then you have to build all sorts of stuff around it called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that kind of overcomes that by hacking around it. And we can talk about that. So takeaway models here is, lessons is, don't ask what is the largest model we can afford given our budget. Ask what is the smallest model that I can get away with. And that's a different different angle and a different way of thinking about stuff. Let me skip this too. I included one example from Adobe Firefly, which is a very nice implementation done responsibly. They basically trained a model on their own data that they own, their own image library. They indemnified users against any IP issues because they did that. They integrated it in a platform, Photoshop, that's used by millions. And now you have the ability to click on an image, say, hey, insert a classic car here, give me a reflecting pond. And hey, while you're at it, add a cloud that looks like the car. This can actually happen in about 10, 15 seconds, which is amazing. That's a good integration of the possibilities here. So in conclusion, we worry a lot about our students. You know, can we upskill? Can we generate co-ops who have high demand? How do we scale the learning of AI at Northeastern? How do we embrace AI learning tools in the classroom, which we're doing in a huge campaign? How do we graduate the most AI savvy students and cohorts in academia? Very important to us. And for employers, you know, how do you keep and retain these employees, and how do you attract them? Talent is the most important. Here's another slide from that talk. Secret 7 is the talent and the team. And working with the Roux Institute, we've kind of evolved a whole program around AI literacy, AI business usage, AI technical usage, technical in-house expertise as in engineers, and for executives and leaders, and policy and regulation and law. These are different types of courses. For B, C, and D, we think the right way to do this is in the context of actually doing projects, real projects. So with Bangor Savings Bank, for example, which is a great example of how the Roux Institute is building an in-house academy for BSB, we do it in the context of 5 projects that the bank needs of AI capabilities to help them service the customers better, faster, etc., more efficiently. But we use that as an opportunity to teach the workers and upskill them. When you do it in the context of a real project that's happening that affects your job, your tendency to retain and understand and realize the difference is much higher than if you just give lectures and go away. So keep that in mind. We're strong believers in the experiential education, and you can get, I point to some of our, since I'm out of time, I'm going to skip the overview of the Institute, but there are testimonials from Bob Montgomery Rice and many others at BSB as an example. We've also worked with Full Scope RMS. We've worked with many other companies who are giving us public testimonials. So the summary: no data, no working AI. Human intervention is a must. And that one, the human intervention, is something that if we embrace for Maine and think through those issues, how do you collect and curate that intervention and correction data, we can get huge advantages. The biggest threat to AI, of AI from humanity is it's not the super intelligence. I'm not worried about that at all. I am worried about how these capabilities can be leveraged by the bad actors to create a completely disoriented digital existence for us. And that is the real big threat here. The ability to create a story, 1,000 variations on that story that's made up, 1,000 sites to support that story, and thousands of followers for each site, all done robotically. So if you try to investigate, you just believe it. You think it's true. And that's the scary part. And the last one, of course, is mind the gap. The biggest danger to AI from this hype is the gap between how amazing the demo is and how disappointing the implementation is. Many times when companies try to implement this in whether it's Microsoft Copilots or any of the others, they're super disappointed in the result. So there's an opportunity there to kind of excel at it and do good work. So with that, I will kind of end the presentation and turn it over to Q&A. Hopefully this was helpful. Happy to give the longer talk anytime, even on smaller groups.
Thank you, Dr. Fadden. We do want to, we've got just a couple minutes at this point, but we do want to open the opportunity to ask any questions. So, you know, speak up. I can call on people who know are likely to have questions, but I want to give people the opportunity to ask Dr. Fad anything specific in his presentation. I also want to thank you for a broad survey and a deep understanding. We are going to talk about the ethics issues a little bit later today. Questions?
Dr. Fayed, yeah, I had a question. It's Warren Valdmanis. I'm from Future of Work Partners. Mike, you said something very interesting about an 80%, 15 to 80% acceleration in the knowledge economy, which is half the economy. Doctor, do you think it's more likely to express itself as an acceleration of sort of better products and services, or doing the same with fewer workers? Like, how does that acceleration express itself in your view?
Yeah. Great question. I think where it will apply the most is for a lot of these droning, repetitive, robotic tasks that we do a lot of in the knowledge economy, right? I want to start a new task. Well, I got to do this, and that. I got to connect to this system. I got to grab an old presentation. I got to get an Excel spreadsheet and change it. A lot of that stuff can be done very quickly, very reliably by machines. And then the human needs to check it, because I don't trust, honestly, and we should not trust anything that comes out of the machine, because it doesn't know what it doesn't know, and it doesn't know when it hasn't even been trained on an area. So the speed up will be, the effect will be speed up. Now, speed up can be translated into job reductions, but there's another interpretation. Speed up, if you have a workforce that understands AI, means you now do something important much faster, much more efficiently, and therefore more demand is created because you get more users who can afford to pay for it. So suddenly all these functions, whether they're compliance functions or analytics functions or marketing functions, they come within reach of the next tier of businesses, which of course in the pyramid is much larger. And therefore you get more demand. This is like, accounting. Accounting of 60 years ago has nothing to do with accounting today, right? You had to deal with ledgers and have a good handwriting and good addition skills in your head and all of that. Today, it's all put, in software that understand IFRS and GAAP and so forth. But do we have more accounts today than we did 60 years ago? Absolutely. We have more accounts today than we've had in the history of human civilization, because accounting became much more relevant. It got democratized. So I think that's the trade-off we'll have. We'll have a lot more consumption and a lot more jobs if we have a workforce that's ready to do those new jobs that require the leverage of AI.
Excellent. Sam, I see you've got your hand up. You've got a question for Dr. Fad?
Yeah, thank you. First off, for the very informative presentation. I learned a lot from it. One of the questions that I had to follow up on the last one about the knowledge economy is about the creative economy, and I'm interested in the implications of what this could mean for someone like a graphic designer who, has produced a logo that could be replicated by AI. If I say I want a logo that looks like the logo for Dick's Sporting Goods for my business, is there a way to backtrack to figure out whose intellectual property was utilized to generate a logo? And is that, what is that going to look like for people in that role of producing creative content, whether that's music, art, etc.?
Yeah, very difficult question. Very relevant though. Like, for example, the whole, graphic arts was disrupted when the computers and the PCs became very capable, and it redefined what a graphic artist does. And a lot of the artists who know how to leverage tools like Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, etc., gained a lot of efficiencies, and many more jobs were created in that space. Here, when it comes to creativity and kind of logo design and any design, it's a super tricky question, because how much of, seeing prior logos and understanding what the population is used to seeing and what it finds acceptable and unacceptable is kind of public domain, because companies put it out there and you're like getting the zeitgeist. I'm sure human designers do a lot of that and notice a lot of these things, and how much of it is essentially copyright infringement, but done in a more clever way and hidden. That is very hard to decode the way these algorithms work. It's a very difficult legal question. I think we'll see what the New York Times and Wall Street Journal lawsuit against OpenAI and others will look like in terms of its results. But I do think the one thing to keep in mind is the technology of today, it's only able to regurgitate or map the past, what it has seen in the past, to some form that looks like today. So anything creative, anything new, anything that requires meaning, it can't do. We still need a human to say, look, I need it to do this. And often you have to come up with these new designs anyway to teach the machine new capabilities. But for run-of-the-mill logo processing and so forth, I mean, I was talking to a company we work with this morning. They are in this business. And of course, they leverage a lot of workers in India. They send them a logo, and the CEO was complaining to me, like, you can't imagine how many ways you can misspell the word Google. You know, and we get these logos back that are nonsensical, and these are humans. You know, can't your AI, you know, detect errors like this? And of course, you know, for things like this, that's a nice to have, but that is a seriously open question, is the disruption to the creative arts. I think coming up with new stories, new concepts will not happen by machines, and not in the next decade. But you know, if you want run-of-the-mill marketing story or some kind of generic content that speeds up your ability to edit it and create better on top of it, I think that's going to experience a lot of acceleration. And you know, like I said, acceleration will mean job elimination if you don't keep up with it. It will mean job creation if you actually know how to use the technology and you master it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dr. Fad. And actually, those questions and answers, I think, do a nice job of leading us to our next two guests. But I really appreciate both the breadth of your presentation and its depth, given your limited time. I'm sure we're going to want to follow up with you. Now we're going to move to two.
And I noticed there were questions I didn't answer. So two things, happy to answer them offline. And number two, I apologize for going over my 20-minute limit in the presentation. Should have left more time for discussion.
I'm sure the 20-minute limit presented some challenges for you, because it is a broad area. But thank you again very much, and we would like to follow up with you afterwards.
Sure.
First, we're going to hear from Cassandra Madison. Now, Cassandra is the Chief Operating Officer at the Center for Public Policy AI, bringing us a really strong background in public policy and technology, and focusing on the points where we integrate emerging technologies into government operations. Cass is especially adept at bridging the gap between tech and public service. And importantly, and I think some of the questions here really lead us to this path, emphasizing responsible and ethical adoption of AI. So Cass holds a degree in international relations and affairs from the University of Colorado, and Cass is going to be followed by Nishant Shah. Now, Nishant's a senior advisor for responsible AI for the state of Maryland, so very relevant to this conversation. His background is in technology policy and governance, and he's working in the space to develop safe, transparent, and again, ethical practices for AI. Nishant held positions crafting policy recommendations and balancing that technological progress with public accountability. He holds a degree in computer science, not surprisingly, from the University of Maryland. So I think I'll cross over here to Cassandra to lead us into the conversation, and then you can provide a natural segue, and we'll come back and have a couple minutes for questions and answers once again.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I did prepare a couple slides. It's a pleasure to be here with you all to kind of give you a little bit more about what's going on across the country. And then Nishant would invite you to pop in at any point during that conversation. And then we thought we could do like a little fireside chat. So I've queued up a few questions for Nishant, because I think Maryland is a really helpful case study for you all. But I will try to leave as much time as we can for questions. And David, you can help be our guide on making sure that we leave plenty of time for that.
Will do.
Okay. So I am going to share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Make sure this all works. Okay. Can you all see that in full screen mode?
I certainly can, so go forward.
Okay, great. I can't see your faces exactly, so it's helpful for you to tell me what you can see. Okay. So you have Nishant and I, as David mentioned, COO for Center for Public Sector AI. We're a nonprofit focused on helping government make good decisions on emerging tech, with a specific focus on AI. My background is in government service. So like way back in the day, started as a policy person working adjacent to government with a bunch of different nonprofits, then spent about 8 years in Vermont state government. So not too far away, also, pretty small state, pretty rural. So understand some of the challenges that Maine is facing. Also personally love Maine, and we make it up there for vacations every summer. So excited to be here. And then I'll let Nishant, do you just want to give a quick introduction before we dive in?
And Nishant, you might correct for this group your academic credentials that I've misquoted. So thank you.
I assume it was just like a wrong AI output, in fact. So it's a good setup for the conversation. I'm Nishant Shah. I'm Senior Advisor for Responsible AI for Governor Moore, and I had AI enablement for the state of Maryland. My background's a bit of a mishmash. I was a product leader at Amazon and Meta, including on sort of Meta's responsible AI team prior to this. I worked at the U.S. Digital Service during the Obama administration. And prior to that was actually in international development and social enterprise abroad. So sort of a smattering of a bunch of different things, and academically backgrounds in public policy and geopolitics.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Y'all are still seeing my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
well
So
said.
just, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So on CPSAI, already mentioned, we're really focused on equipping government leaders with knowledge, tools, and expertise. What that looks like for us is we really do 4 things. A big piece of what we do is education. And so some of this we do ourselves, some of this we do in partnerships with other organizations, making sure that folks have the baseline knowledge they need to make good decisions. 2 is all about mitigating risk. And this is working collaboratively with government and with partners to develop things like operational guardrails and evaluation mechanisms, procurement standards, things like that. The 3rd thing is really focused on building capacity. And so a lot of times what we're doing is augmenting state capacity. We have something called a project clearinghouse, which I can talk about later. Essentially, if states have an AI project that they're considering, they can come to a bunch of tech, data, and AI experts, and we can give them some feedback and advice, because not every state can hire their whole own cadre of AI experts. So we try to augment capacity wherever we can. And then the 4th piece is really focused on accelerated learning, and think about this as communities of practice and affinity groups. When states are working on similarly situated pilots or considering AI in similarly situated programs, we try to bring those groups of folks together so that they can learn from each other. So we really try to listen to and organize 2 major constituencies here. One, we have a public sector advisory board that's focused on health and human services leaders across the country. We have 18 current and former HHS leaders on that board, but all told, we engage about 30 different states. And then the second group, of which Nishant and Daniel and folks are a part of, is state AI advisors. So, excuse me, for about the past year, we've been convening folks who are the lead on AI in their states and a community of practice. And so that's where a lot of the more in-depth discussions are happening. And so I tell you these 2 things so that as we go through and I kind of share a little bit about what's happening across the country, just know that a lot of this knowledge is grounded in these 2 constituencies, as well as the other partners, both nonprofits, philanthropy, industry that we talk to and convene around. I'll come back to the Project Clearinghouse later and key partners. So on the state landscape, a couple things. First thing I would say is that there's a lot of variation across the country in where states are and what they're focusing on. And I pulled some headlines here, and it runs the gamut from states who are like a state like Nevada, who announced late last year that they were going to go all in on AI, generative AI, for their unemployment insurance system, to other states who are taking a much more cautious approach and saying, hey, what we're going to first focus on is helping create some policies and guidelines for how our state employees use the commodity AI models. So Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, there's some partnerships with OpenAI. And then there's a whole bunch of work that states are doing on considering policies and regulation and oversight and data and energy and things like that. But I would just say that there's no one size fits all here. And a lot of it is driven both by the capacity internally in the state and the other sort of resource and assets they have at their disposal. And a lot of times, like the political goals and aspirations of leadership, right? You have some governors who really want their state to be a national leader on AI, and they're okay being on the very leading edge. There are others who want to take a more cautious wait and see approach. And I think it's kind of nice to have that variation because the states who are more comfortable being on the leading edge, I would consider Maryland one of those. It puts policies in place and experiments with things that other states can learn from. So when I think about what types of things states are working on, there's a couple different categories of things. So I would put kind of policy, governance, and strategic planning all in one category. These are a lot of states are setting up advisory committees like what you all have that have stakeholders from a variety of different sectors to drive how they're thinking about things. States are setting up governance structures internally and trying, in some cases, to centralize how decisions are made about which technologies to experiment with and when to deploy them. And there's a whole host of states that are working on on their strategic plans. And we'll dive into Maryland's a little bit today. Then there's a whole host of things around training and upskilling both the internal workforce within government. An example there would be Innovate US. They are working with about 9 states already to develop, they're philanthropically funded to develop baseline training for staff internally in government. And then there's states who are working with local universities and creating private sector partnerships to do some of this upskilling and workforce work, creating centers of excellence, creating labs, those sorts of things. On this infrastructure side, there's more and more states talking about energy and compute, starting to talk about data quality, talking about security and privacy. And then on the use case side, there's a couple different flavors of this. There's states who are doing, even internally, some like narrow use case experimentation. Like, can we use generative AI to help deal with large amounts of unstructured data and help our caseworkers get easier access to rules and policies, for example. There's AI for employee productivity, which I kind of already mentioned, which are the things like these big Gemini, Copilot, and OpenAI pilots to say, like, what are the guardrails around how we let government workers use these tools in their day-to-day work? And then enterprise capabilities. And I think about this as, maybe in your Health and Human Services agency, you have a case management system, and this vendor that you've been contracting with for a long time comes and says, hey, we have this AI or generative AI capability. We want to turn it on, and you have to make a decision, yay or nay. Those are some of the features that we see on the use case side. Anything you want to add to that, Nishant? Okay. Sorry, I'm still getting over the cold, so I have to cough every so often. Okay, and then I thought, it would be helpful after talking to Daniel, understanding your 3 priority areas, to just offer some thoughts on what's going on in these 3 big areas. So preparing the workforce on AI, we already heard a little bit about this in the previous presentation, but a bunch of states, like I said, are working on AI training for state employees. Some states are paying for that. Some states are developing it themselves. Some states are working with nonprofits like Innovate US to make sure that their staff have baseline knowledge. There's a couple states, not many, that are starting to make it mandatory. Some states have left it up to agencies to decide if training is mandatory, and some states it's just not mandatory yet. There's a whole bunch of university partnerships. Most recently was talking to the state of New Jersey. They worked with Princeton to announce a $72 million AI center. And so for states that have those big academic institutions, they're leaning in and trying to build partnerships there. And there's money on the table for those sorts of things. And then there's increasing discussion on preparing for workforce disruption. Again, we talked about this on the previous in the previous presentation a little bit. Opinions on this are highly variable around, are jobs going to go away? Are jobs not going to go away? Is it human plus AI, or humans going to get replaced? I don't think there's clear answers, but I do think there's an increasing sense of urgency among government leaders to talk about how do we handle this. And it could be the state infrastructure to handle like large amounts of displaced workers who need benefits. It might be policies around this that are focused on, when can humans be replaced in government? But I think it's still fuzzy, but there's an increasing interest in conversations on this at the state level. When we think about protecting Maine residents from harm, the second big priority, there's really 3 areas that I think about here. So the first piece is policy, regulation, and governance. And Nishant can talk about this a little bit too. I think I've heard it described as a dizzying number of pieces of legislation being considered at the state level to monitor how, when, where AI is rolled out and to protect people from harm. I think given there's certainly a pacing problem here where, given the capacity and knowledge of state government and legislatures across the country, it can be challenging to craft legislation that walks the right balance between protecting from harm, but not stifling innovation and not getting so prescriptive that it doesn't feel applicable to technology that's developed a year from now. I also, and this is number 3 on here, but the shifting federal landscape, I think we saw, there was a big international gathering in Paris last week. If you haven't seen the vice president's speech on AI, it's definitely 15 minutes that are worth a listen. But I think in an environment where we're likely to see less regulation at the federal level, less model policies around fairness and equity, it just means states are going to have to do more of this work. And I think there's a real opportunity for states to work together, because an environment in which there's 50 different sets of rules and approaches is going to be, it's challenging for the private sector, it's challenging for the public sector to navigate these things. So some of that role CPS-AI is trying to play, there are other organizations as well, but I think as much as possible, states trying to work together and band together and support each other, and this is going to be crucial so that we don't have, and we may end up with it anyway, but having 50 different flavors of this is challenging. And then the other thing, again, mentioned in the previous presentation, is just how do you oversee and monitor AI systems in practice? I think that some of this is just good tech governance, but some of it is new. And deploying AI safely in government context requires capacity to identify and address errors in real time, hallucinations, things like that. And I've started to see more nonprofits and even private sector companies who are trying to build tools that they will then sell to government to monitor these systems. They're still very nascent, and it's not clear how you evaluate the quality and efficacy of those tools. There's also a pretty active debate around what is the baseline that you're comparing an AI solution to. People aren't, what we hear often is like, humans are fallible and they're not accurate 100% of the time. And so is it good enough to have a system that meets the same accuracy of a human? Do you need to ensure that it is more accurate? They're never going to be accurate all the time. So how are you planning around that? There's a whole set of conversations and new muscles there and capacity that states need to build to be able to effectively monitor these systems, and will require thoughtful coordination and discussion, so that if states are being pitched a tool to evaluate a piece of technology, like how you understand whether or not to say yes or no to those solutions. Nishant, anything? Anything you want to add?
This is fantastic.
Okay. Okay. And then the last category that y'all are focusing on, exploring AI's most promising applications in government. I think a couple themes we see here. Again, I'm glad that we're singing from the same hymnal from the previous presentation, but encouraging small pilots and experimentation. A growing number of states are setting up these labs and like I said, building these university and private partnerships to enable experimentation. So it's worth really thinking about where the places for that kind of experimentation in government. I think one of the things I've learned about technology rollouts in government, and honestly being a part of some really problematic ones. I was in state government when we had our own little healthcare.gov disaster in Vermont, for example, and we learned a lot of lessons from that about what not to do. So like going big doesn't mitigate risk and does not increase your chances of success. Doing things small and iterating gives you a much better chance of rolling something out successfully. And saying, I think in the case of AI, that if you're experimenting with something and you decide not to deploy it, that's not a failure. And I think in government, a lot of times we are trained to think that if something doesn't go live, we have failed. But there's a whole lot of learning that has to happen here. And deciding not to deploy something, but learning a lot in the process is just as valuable as deciding to deploy something. And that's a little bit of a mindset shift. The other thing I would say is lots of states are focusing on back end, not all, like in the case of Nevada, but working on some of those back end repetitive processes allow you to experiment in safer, more controlled ways than putting a Gen AI chatbot out to the general public. And we've seen a few examples of that already last year that had some problems. So when I look at the common pilots that states are thinking about, again, we talked about the big commodity models for productivity. There's pilots focused on making this unstructured data easier to access. So think like notes from community meetings, program policies and eligibility rules, caseworker notes, things that would normally be very difficult to sift through. Those are no-brainer cases for AI, although if you're relying on AI to interpret the data that it's analyzing and make decisions for you, then that gets into like more problematic territory for now. There's some states working on chat bots, both internally and externally. There's been some chatter around legacy code transition, which seems like a big opportunity. I haven't seen as much of that as expected. Maybe Nishant, you have thoughts on that, but it is definitely something folks are talking about. And then there's some places thinking about automated document processing. So again, the back end repetitive high volume tasks that often create backlogs or take a long time for workers to sift through. These are right places for experimentation with AI. Just a quick note on readiness, and we'll get into this as we talk to Nishant, but understanding readiness is really important and feels like a thing that lots of these task forces that are being created are thinking about. And so on the Center for Public Sector AI side, we're kind of using Maryland's strategic plan as a model and bringing some stakeholders together to build some tools and readiness frameworks that could be helpful for states. So more to come over the next couple months here. But the really important pillars here, obviously, first one is governance and strategy. So like, what are you trying to accomplish and how are you making decisions? That goes for when tools are used inside government and how you might think about encouraging their use in the broader community. Data quality, access, and infrastructure. We heard a lot about this already this morning. Talent and workforce readiness. I'd be remiss if I didn't also double down on this one. Before my time at Tech Talent, at Center for Public Sector AI, I spent 5 years at Tech Talent Project, where all I did was try to bring tech leaders into government. And whether government is buying these technologies or building these technologies, you need folks inside who understand them and can help make good decisions and can ask vendors the right questions. And that's a whole stream of work that needs time and attention. And I know is challenging in places like Maine and Vermont, where there may be less talent to choose from, but it's out there. Thinking about AI use cases and readiness for experimentation, thinking about public trust, equity, and safeguards, and then funding and sustainability. I think a hot topic of conversation in our AI advisors group lately has been, what is the cost of these tools? What are their financial models? And it's kind of all over the place right now. I think this is another place where there's room for lessons learned and sharing of information across states. The more states work together, the more purchasing power they have, there's potential to drive the market in some ways, potentially. But I think there's some big open questions there around budget and cost. Those were the big things I wanted to share with you. I want to talk to Nishant a little bit, but let me just pause for a second and see if there's questions.
Any questions for Cass? Cass, I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Nishant, maybe you could start. You've been working with the state of Maryland for a little over a year now, I think, in this role, and wondering if you could share a little bit about Maryland's journey. Like, what was it like when you walked in the door compared to where you are now, and how did you figure out what to focus on? Could start there.
Yeah, it's a good question, and time has no meaning. I think I joined in like September 2023. That time has flown by. You know, prior to my joining, there were a handful of folks who had been meeting essentially like once a month from the governor's office, the state's IT shop, a few other agencies to essentially figure out what to do around AI. There was, of course, lots of interest across the state. There were some surveys. Legislators had brought it up as a point of conversation, and constituents had brought it up sort of across the state as something that they want addressed. But most of what was happening at that point was kind of just conversation without a lot of formal work underpinning it. What I found when I joined was that there were a lot of different mental models on what AI is, what adoption would look like, who's responsible for what. That operating model conversation was particularly complicated, and sort of what to focus on first, and what should be sort of the roadmap here. So, my position was sort of conceptualized as having someone as a single-threaded owner to sort of build momentum and sort of strategy in the space, and then figure out what execution looks like there. A lot of my work in the first few months was really cohering folks' mental models. I was having lots of conversations with agency secretaries and CIOs and folks in those agencies who were had already been working on different AI systems and were thinking about sort of what the next stage there looks like. Quite a bit with the governor's team as they were putting together what do they want their narrative to be? What direction they want to push the state in sort of different elements of AI, like in economic development and workforce and other sort of crucial topic areas. And then also legislative leaders. I joined at a time when session was just about to start in another like 2 to 3 months. So there were a lot of folks thinking through legislation with draft bills. And based on sort of all of those conversations, and after quite a bit of debate, I put together a plan to focus the state on really 2 lenses: responsible use and productive use. And that really started by embracing a set of principles and noting a set of principles that the state should abide by in its use of AI, and then what the initial work would be to get the foundations to make those principles real and not just words on paper. We decided the best way to do that would be via an executive order. There's some discussion around, can we just start this work? Do we really need an EO or, a sort of another mandate there? But sort of given the highly decentralized nature of Maryland's agencies and technology systems, we're a very federated state with regards to our technology. we felt like we needed a public executive order to really cohere that action and to sort of start shifting this tanker into a canonical direction. So we got that out, in January 2024. We worked with legislators January and February of that year to enshrine elements of that into law. And so by early Q2 of 2024, I'd say like 5 months after I joined, we had our initial approach built out and some marching orders in place.
That's super helpful. Can you talk, just one or two more questions will open up, but like, can you talk a little bit about governance structures and how you all have approached that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and when you say governance, do you mean like specific use cases or like
I
writ
would
large?
think more like, how are you thinking about external and internal stakeholders? So in what ways are you engaging folks outside of Maryland and the strategy and planning? And then how are you making decisions inside about what to say yes to and what to say no to?
Yeah, on the question of engaging stakeholders, and I'll tie it back to governance in a bit, because I think they're two slightly separate things. Internally, we set up a group called the AI Subcabinet. The AI Subcabinet is made up of a number of agency secretaries or their designees, a few folks from the governor's office, a few of the larger agency CIOs, and it's meant to be the governing body for AI in the state. So it sort of does a lot of the agenda setting. It's the escalation path if there's a particularly complicated or high-risk use case that comes through intake. This would be the group that sort of debates it and also sort of prioritizes the projects that should be taken on at what period of time. And beyond the AI subcabinet, we also set up essentially like an internal community of practice. These are folks that are thinking about or building their agencies' approaches to AI across the state. We opened that up to county and municipal level governments as well. And so, this has sort of become a de facto meeting place, a discussion area. We'll put straw men sort of documents on, here's what we want to do around our intake process. You have a week, give us all your thoughts. It's sort of a way to engage with critical stakeholders across the state and ensure that those voices are embedded into our approaches as we build internal policies. We also started this office hours process. Essentially, myself and a handful of others who we hired since that are leading the AI work to have like one guaranteed area per week where folks can join and just ask any questions they have on sort of the top of their minds. And so that's been a really helpful sort of window of time to have for folks to ask anything from how does a Gen AI model work? Like how do you build or train these systems, to pricing questions, to what is an AI shaped problem, to I want to do X thing, like what are the next steps that I should take to do that. So that's been sort of a good place to get a lot of initial information and data. And then from that, we're sort of taking that and saying, okay, like the folks across the state want these 4 or 5 different services. And a lot of the work right now is cohering that set of services that we provision centrally. We've also stood up an intake process. So this is essentially, all uses of AI across the state need to go through this sort of centralized intake process. And so there's like an initial ticket and a bunch of information that they give. And there is a deliberative body that looks at that set of things, discusses it, and then sort of works with the agency to help them understand, okay, here are here's where there are risky areas to the problem statement that you put forth. We look at it from a product angle as well. So, there's some things where honestly, a chatbot's probably not the right answer. And so a lot of that is like, is this an AI shaped problem and what might other sort of approaches be? We help them get a risk profile in place. So, okay, is it low, medium, high risk? If it's high risk, that means that now we have to sort of do deeper due diligence. This is, you would do a risk assessment and some other work, and that would yield essentially we shouldn't move forward with this. or you can move forward, but here are some sort of mitigations you should put in place in order to do that. So that's a lot of the internal conversations there. There are sort of continual meetings that we have with sort of state agency leaders on like a quarterly basis, where we'll sort of go through, here are the policies we recently put out, or here's a contract that we've made available for X type of tool. And so all of those have been helpful to sort of serve as an iterative approach to ensuring that, okay, the services that we start with are not what the services will be 3 months from now. Instead, it's sort of a continually maturing, improving process.
I think
yeah.
just one thing, and then we should finish up. Curious about if you could provide some commentary on policy. So I think this is also a topic of conversation for this group. How to think about what's going on in the legislatures across the country and how policy and rules are showing up around not just how AI works in government, but how AI shows up in the private sector.
Yeah, big question on the sort of the policy side. So I have experience in 2 sessions now. This is in the midst of the second one. I'll note a few things. One, I think strong communications between the executive branch and the legislature is absolutely key in this area. It is a critical legislative priority. Certainly in Maryland, last session, we had 23 bills that were put forth around AI. And this session, I think we have something like 17 or something like that. And so, some of those replicate things that are already happening in the state and might be better done by internal policy rather than sort of legislation. And some of them are incredibly helpful from a fiscal note perspective, and from we probably wouldn't be able to push this forward internally if it wasn't actually in the letter of the law. So those communications channels were weaker initially when we first joined, and were sort of ad hoc. And now we have much more sort of consistent check-ins with a lot of the legislators that are sort of taking lead on writing and passing AI-related bills. I think it's really crucial to be able to see these bills and have the right folks around the table during drafting, and not just after it's been drafted. The reason there is because, small changes in words or definitions have pretty significant implications on how you would actually operationalize a set of policies. So if you're doing a set of requirements around training data transparency, or deployer obligations, or disclosures, or you're creating criminal or civic penalties around deepfake revenge porn, which is something that we're discussing right now in Maryland. Small little changes in these things allow them to be implemented or not. And so having some sort of technical IQ at the table, in addition to sort of the policy side and the focus on outcomes, I think is really crucial.
Thanks, Nishant. And there are some folks, there's a lot of what Nishant and I do is think about how AI is used in government. There's other partners that we work with that really have a pulse on what is happening legislatively across the country, and what's the posture in different states, and what are states wrestling with. So to folks on this call, if there's interest in having deeper discussions, happy to connect you with folks who I think could really bring those perspectives to the table for you. We also took more time than was originally allotted. So David, I'm going to look to you. Happy to take questions. Also understand if you all have to move on to the rest of your agenda, and we can follow up after.
We're doing okay. Are there 1 or 2 questions that we might be able to generate? Mary, I'll let you take the controls from there.
Sure. There was a question in the chat that I wanted to point us back to. I think Heather Pingree asked about the deliberative body, Nishant, that you were talking about as these adopters are coming in with plans, and you're helping to advise in different ways. How is that really structured?
Yeah, so I think that's the AI sub-cabinet that you're probably referring to. This is a group of around 20 folks that meets monthly. I facilitate the group. It is chaired by the department, the secretary of the Department of Information Technology, and it's essentially constituted by the secretaries from Department of Health, budget and management, labor, homeland security, and a handful of others. Essentially, the areas where there are sort of frontline, really immediate needs around artificial intelligence, and where either work is happening from the adoption perspective or sort of key folks from a policy and governance perspective. So the way that these tend to work is, we'll sort of open up the agenda over the course of the month. We'll close it about a week before. And we'll have 2 or 3 items that we do deep dives into. Sometimes we'll have folks join those meetings, experts externally, academic folks, people from the community, who have something to say about it. We try getting as diverse a group of folks as possible to give sort of perspectives there. And then that is sort of leverage to help that group make a decision. It serves as a voting body as well. For example, this intake process and our sort of V1 governance framework that we put out was voted upon by that body to be adopted. That includes things like, use cases that are blocked and not allowed across the state. And there's debate there between, folks with different equities from different agencies, some who are much more risk averse, some who focus more on sort of the innovation side. And so this group will come to sort of a good path forward. And then we will sort of embed that into policy and sort of budgets and sort of next steps.
That's great. Hannah, forgive me. I think I said Heather. I'm sorry, Cass, please go ahead, respond. I was going
to say, I think one of the things I'm struggling with, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, Nishant, I think it's still evolving across the country, is how much infrastructure, decision-making, governance do you set up just for AI? And do you keep AI and Gen AI over here, and then all your other technology decisions are over here? And at what point do we say, okay, well, government needs to make good decisions on tech and tech delivery in order to deliver services and benefits appropriately. You need to have good tech regulation versus separating out AI. And do we get to a point where it's not this separate governance body? Because I just think about like long-term sustainability of having these sort of separate streams. I'm curious, Nishant, how you think about
I think you have to move to a place where they're integrated over time. I think a lot of the reason for keeping it separate is because there are a lot of things that are specific to the set of technologies that do require a lot of conversation and sort of different approaches. It's like probabilistic rather than deterministic systems and has a lot of implications. And the fact that it's moving so rapidly sort of requires its sort of own path to be able to stay on top of that, take learnings and sort of feed them back into what existing operating models look like. Our approach in Maryland is that, we have this sort of separate stream around AI, but the whole idea is to then sort of incubate things. So as we create policies, for example, we have an AI enablement team that we just stood up. This enablement team is sort of looking at the frontier. It's creating the initial set of policies, and then it's training another existing team to take those policies and sort of iterate on them forward. So this intake process, we created this initial process, what red teaming looks like, what test and evaluation looks like in that. But we are sort of then training the existing governance, risk, and compliance team to do that work. And then we will go and look back at the frontier and sort of do another set of things. And so the idea here is that you're always sort of taking what's coming out, integrating to processes, but the only way for this stuff to be sustainable is that it lives with existing teams. It can't be something that's over here.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Very, very helpful. I think at this point, we should transition over to the open discussion, and I should thank Cass and Nishant for their lovely presentations and for the Q&A back and forth. It's been incredibly informative. We now have 25 minutes amongst the task force and technical advisors, and the goal is really to reflect on these presentations in the context of our charge to produce Maine-specific recommendations, and like to offer some prompts here to your thinking along the lines of this. Does learning about the national landscape shape where Maine's task force should focus our recommendations? Are there new opportunities, challenges, or implications for Maine from AI that you hadn't previously considered? And then finally, are there examples of AI in Maine that would be particularly relevant for us to learn about? And to get us started, I'm going to invite Commissioner Heather Johnson from Maine's Department of Economic and Community Development to talk about some initial reflections. Heather, can you unmute and join in?
Yes, thank you. I think I'm unmuted. Is that right?
Yep, correct. We
Great.
can hear you.
Super. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting today is this concept of, do you go big or do you go small? And can you go small and fast fix into really good outcomes, right? How do you measure it? What are the pieces? I think Dan is going to drop into the chat. What we're seeing Maine businesses do is a lot of that. I'm sure some of the bigger businesses are taking bigger swings, and we're seeing this partnerships with Rue and the community college and others. But we opened up a grant for domestic trade to help small Maine businesses get their products into other markets than Maine, right? That not international, but other U.S. markets. And what you'll see there is a company that partnered with us, and they really took their first step into technology, and Google picked them up for a Super Bowl ad. And so what you'll see is the Google Super Bowl ad, because I think it's interesting to listen to them talk about technology and about AI specifically. And again, as for the technology folks on this call, you're going to look at that and think that's not a very big swing. But what it is, I think, is a heritage Maine business trying that first step, trying it in a dose that they could manage and control, and really already seeing value, and then sharing that value out to other businesses. And so, what we are seeing kind of across the state, businesses taking these early steps and seeing these opportunities. I liked the idea of having a warehouse of information that could be helpful to them. And I know a lot of them are working with higher eds across the state to do that, and then I think there continues to be an ongoing discussion about not just adult retraining, but like, how do we start in K-12, right? Which Commissioner Macon and her team are really taking a long look at, like, what does that look like, so that students are graduating K-12 with some of these skills as they start to work in these businesses. So I thought the start small ideas, or the keep projects small and manageable, so that they can get executed and move, is really important. And then I do think this concept of what is success and how do we frame success on the front end so that we can track outcomes. Those are two things I took away.
It's great. Comments from other task force members or technical advisors.
I would just, this is Hannah Pingree, just jump in on the first question. Learning about the national landscape is definitely very helpful. I mean, I think as Cass and Nishan just laid out, I mean, I think we're not blazing the trail here. We're following actually a lot of other states who seem to have organized and started to prioritize and have passed more pieces of legislation. I mean, this task force is not about passing bills. It's about, what do we need to do to prepare our state government? What are the risks, and how do we act on them from a policy perspective? So, I mean, I think it would be very helpful, maybe not the federal level, there's lots happening there, but, to hear especially about New England states, smaller states, and how they've grappled with it, and sort of how they're setting up processes and managing decision-making. I mean, we just heard a little bit, but I think that landscape is very helpful, again, because we're not necessarily trailblazing here about how government should interact.
I'm scanning for hands, but if you feel free to shout out. Oh, Dan, Representative Dan Sayre.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just building on what Commissioner Pingree just shared, that the process learning that other states have been through can be really useful to us. Technology moves very fast. The legislative process moves very slowly. And so everything that we can possibly learn from other states managing those two different rates of progress, I think will be very helpful to us in figuring out how we can keep the people's representatives, the legislature, involved in the process, but appropriately involved. And a corollary to that is that I look forward to learning further how other states are managing to keep partisanship out of this area of policy development, because that is something that can be fatal to moving forward at a reasonable pace.
Understood. Senator Libby, I've just noticed your hand up. Does your question correspond with Representative Sayers, or do you have a separate question? Okay, I guess we'll, what are the thoughts relative to Representative Sayers' question? A long silence.
I think you put Senator Libby on the spot since he's.
Well, I didn't know if Senator Libby's question was similar in relation and whether it added to the conversation or it was in a different direction. So, and I gathered
it's a little bit different.
Okay, so let's stay with Representative Sayers' question, and then we'll come back to Senator Libby. Mary, are you sensing any?
I think it's a stumper.
I think it is a stumper.
I think or other that, or people dreaming about their Valentine's dinner tonight, perhaps.
I wonder. Well, I wonder if we note it, set it to the side, and come back to it, because it may be a very thought-provoking question. So if you want to move on with the Q&A, we can.
Yeah, let's move to Senator Libby's comment and see if that spurs any new thoughts on the previous work. Senator Libby.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I think one of the things that I didn't hear about, and I'm most concerned about, has more to do with security of information, the fakes and deep fakes. And I didn't hear much about blockchain and the use of blockchain. And, I sometimes view blockchain as like more of an audit trail than anything else, and as opposed to being a preventative mechanism. And think of the damage that could be done with some of this new AI ability, and how for government. I think one central question will be maybe turning AI on itself to determine how we can create better security mechanisms. The security mechanisms that I'm really concerned about. Does that make any sense?
It does. I wonder what panelists think about that. Are there AI-driven counter AI measures that need to be facilitated?
If I could, I just on that topic, at the university system, in all of the, the training, just the simple training that we've rolled out so far, it's the first thing that we emphasize, that, that to the extent, I don't think that we need to create new, we at the university, we don't need to create new policy around data. There's already policy that says you shouldn't be putting it into the, online, regardless of what the tool that you're using is. But I forgot where I was going with this. Can you repeat your question, Jim? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Security. Yeah.
Yeah, security is really top of my mind when it comes to the role of government.
Yeah. So the first thing that we do, a part of anything, whether it's just showing people how they can, be more efficient in the way they generate emails, is that for us, for UMS, it needs to be done inside the UMS team space. So we have a chat GPT space that's UMS specific. People are in that Teams account, and we know that data is not being used to train the model. And that's within the first 5 minutes of every training we do. That's the first thing that we say, is that this is great and this is a cool tool, but when you're home at 5 o'clock tonight and you log into, jimlibby.gmail.com, that account, you can't take your work home and do it in that space. So I think that's exactly right. And I think it needs to be part of everything, whether it's simple training or even more complex data systems.
Yeah.
Let me add on
Thanks,
to that.
Ryan.
Let me add on to that point if I could. It's really a trust but verify kind of thing. So setting the policies and establishing the trust of the individuals is the first part. But, there are other organizations that will use AI to go fish those data that your folks have inadvertently utilized outside the university setting in a variety of things to use for untoward purposes. And part of the security valence, security processes that organizations need to have is that verify approach to use those tools themselves to go out and see what's leaking out into the environment to attempt to continually shut that down and retrain individuals. And so there really has to be that same level of activities here as this rolls out, so that you can see where your trustful policies are being violated.
Yeah.
This is JJ Rohana from LOB, and I'll add that I'm right there with you around concerns around the threat actors on the outside using and getting smarter with generative AI. We're absolutely seeing that on a day-to-day basis. It just reinforces, the need to, strengthen your depth and defense from a cybersecurity perspective within the government, for sure, because they're getting smarter about how to access our environments, and AI is only going to make that, more as time progresses.
For sure.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if the bad actors outnumber us.
The answer is yes.
Representative Sayre.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that I had the opportunity to learn last weekend at a national conference of state legislators working group on AI, cybersecurity, and data privacy, which is the flip side to dealing with this problem, rather than trying to sniff out the bad content, is to accurately label good content. And there's an organization called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity that operates within the Linux Foundation, that has an open technology standard for labeling the provenance of content and enabling the labeling of layers of changes to that content. So there are ways to adopt more transparent practices. And something that we should look at as we look at developing policy.
That makes sense.
Chris, did you have a comment that tied along with that, or changing directions?
I was going to go in a different direction, and I also think Molly's actual hand went up before my virtual hand went.
Then Molly, it is.
Thanks, Chris. This does not bode well that I can't figure out how to raise my hand with my workspace. I just wanted to, so this is sort of parenthetical, but related to the security issue, the privacy issue is really salient too. And I was interested to hear from Maryland, which has just passed a comprehensive data privacy act. And that, I think there are some pieces I'd love to learn more about how Maryland has kind of put together a comprehensive approach that does involve, it sounds like, a lot of different security measures and thoughtfulness about the impact of broader digital access, including AI. So just wanted to raise that up too.
I think our panelists have left us, but maybe they want to, if they're still on, maybe they can comment about that, but.
I'm here, but Nishant's really the right person. So I'm sure he'd be willing to come back and chat about that specifically if helpful.
Great. Kristen, why don't we go to your point?
Thanks. And thanks everyone who's participated today and commented. This has been really terrific discussion. With respect to the framing questions that Dan offered us and our two colleagues who are commissioners, the discussion they offered earlier, the thing that keeps resonating for me is that we have an opportunity with respect to one of our charges around preparing Maine's economy for this opportunity. And the question of big or small, I just keep thinking about we're not sort of independently working on this with respect to only our state, and there's a huge opportunity for us, I think, to go big, just sort of displaying our bias and try to create some distinctiveness for Maine. There are going to be winners, especially in the next couple of years, with respect to economic opportunity, and I think that might be a little bit maybe scary. It may prompt us to think about resources. Two of our guests today advised us to think about pilots, which I think are also pragmatic ways. But at least with respect for me today, with one of our charges as it relates to the economy and workforce, I would invite us to think about how we can go big as a state and for the people of Maine, because I think there's potentially really significant rewards on the other side of that. I'm not sure what it is, and we can maybe find it together, but that's just kind of what's resonating for me hearing the discussion today.
I think it really begs the question, if you carve out that area that could be, at the height of impact for Maine, and what what our competences lead to, really, what is that? But I think that would be a very exciting thing to discuss. If people have comments that follow that, please speak out.
Kirsten Figueroa, I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Administrative and Financial Services. Hi, everybody. Well, I'm just going to be vulnerable, so I'll just say that on the Heart Day, in that it freaks me out to say let's go big or go home, because I just think about the actual day-to-day management of that, and I'm thinking about the staff needs that we have, and even just, I'm not trying to be a naysayer, because a little bit of this makes me feel like I think my mom probably felt when I brought her first phone home to her and said, I'm not calling you on the landline anymore, I'm going to ask you to start using this. And she's like, what the? And that's how I feel about AI. So I should just openly admit that for me, it feels like a new phone. But I'm thinking about how we're trying to train people in this basically constantly moving seawater, where you don't even really know what you're training people for, because it's changing constantly. And then we'll create a go big that, and I'm not naysaying your go big idea. I'm just thinking what is that? It feels so big to me already. I would love that conversation about how do we even define what that is, and then how do we get our arms around it? And how do we help staff who honestly are having a hard time just doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I get the intent of this is kind of to help them do it better. But a little bit of the components that I'm not sure at least in state government, I'm not sure about businesses across state, is that sometimes you can't even think about how you can make something better while you're kind of drowning in what it is that you're even doing. And so I love all of the conversation. I'm just thinking about how we're actually operationalizing it for each one of the people that, we're trying to connect.
All right, Laura had her hand
Very
up.
positive and excited about this effort.
Great point. Laura? Well, I think you're still on mute, Laura.
Hi, Commissioner of the Department of Labor, Laura Portman. And I had my hand up when after Chris's comment, and then when you said, oh, is this building on it? It's like, I'm not sure. And then Commissioner Figueroa jumped in, and it's like, this is building on it. I think for me, it's been a really interesting conversation, and also has identified that there are so many pieces to it. And it depends on which piece we kind of grab onto. When Senator Libby was talking about security, that felt like, oh, I can understand that. That seems like that makes sense. That connects to the work that we do every day. We have unemployment insurance. We've been looking at all kinds of things around security and the comments about bad actors getting worse. I can focus on that. Then when I heard or is it really about state government? Because each of those areas is like ripe for lots of dialogue.
Commissioner?
Yep.
Commissioner, we're having some echoes here, so we may ask you to see if we can resolve that and we'll come back to you. We're all having a hard time hearing that if there's a speaker in the background or something.
Maybe you could put your text in your questions so that we can get it out to people, because I've been trying to piece it together and I can't quite get it.
So I do think Laura was sort of focused on security, and I will share an equal interest in security as it relates to deep fakes. So in Laura's environment, are the actors who are claiming, say, unemployment claims real? I would be interested to know from Kirsten whether Dr. Fayad's sort of suggestion or approach is to go narrow and defined because it's more manageable, both from a cost standpoint and from a technology standpoint, and whether that eases your tension at all.
I mean, that obviously, I think for us, that's where to start. Now, we're just about ready to release a data governance management practice report, right? We have to do one every year. And we were tasked with specific demographic data and asking agencies to help us with, do they collect it? Where do they collect it? And it basically took 4 months, for us to understand 13 data points through 1,200 systems plus 1,200 known systems, right? Plus having people look at their Excel, their access, right? All the things that are still living there that we hold data to. And then while we're having these conversations about how we might share it, how we might feel comfortable sharing it, how we protect it, I love the idea of accurately labeling good content, but for how long? Like, how long is good content good until someone has managed to do something to it that makes it bad? So I think that the going big would successfully be going small the first time. And then taking that and building. And I don't, right now, as I was reading that 28 pages, I think for me, the small got smaller in that some of our challenges were outlined there as being so big that we need to really figure them out in a smaller environment so that we can test how we can then make that process repetitive and more successful.
Yeah, and maybe add on and capture some of the information in the chat. I think, the task of this committee is broad. And I think Laura was attempting to suggest that we really should try to focus and prioritize how we're going to deal, particularly with the security threats and other types of things, so that we're able to make this manageable. And the other question offered by Hannah Pingree really was, maybe Chris could offer some more information about when he says go big. maybe qualify that a little bit and talk about what go big really means to allay some of the fears. But before I turn it over to Chris, I'm just going to say that I think in addition to all the other things that we're talking about technically, I think the change management process of this is going to be important, and best practices around change management for AI can also be a resource that could be recommended by this committee and I think could be helpful. Chris, I'll turn it to you to talk about going big.
Yeah, this is really a fun discussion. I really appreciate Kristen, your reaction to it, because it's prompted me to challenge my own thinking about what I even had in mind. So thanks for the chance to comment again. Maybe just two examples that come to mind. One is, what if we were to think about our charge around opportunity for Mainers in the AI age through the lens of education? The Maine Community College system now is got a fantastic program that benefits recent high school graduates and makes education completely accessible. What if we took that into an AI for all? Every Mainer could experience fundamentals of AI education over the next X amount of months or years, with the goal of quite literally like upskilling the entire citizenry so that we had the most AI ready workforce in all of the country, because it is the talent that makes an economy go. On the flip side of that, I had a second example that I had in mind with respect to creating something of distinction, right? Commissioner Johnson has spent years of service trying to help other companies think about why they might want to do business in Maine. I don't exactly know what it is, but is there something that we could rally around from an AI perspective that would give us and go quickly, because other states are going to do it too, as our representative shared with us, that could give us an unfair advantage or give us something very distinct where people might sort of beyond the talent choose to operate in Maine? That maybe that's facilities, maybe it's advantages. It seems like power is going to be hugely important to the AI economy. We have a history with power and water and mills and what have you. Maybe we could leverage something uniquely Maine and turn it into advantage. And oh, by the way, if you put talent together with distinct advantages with respect to facilities or power or something else, now maybe we have two secret ingredients that would give us some advantages economically and pull new opportunities to the state. I totally understand that, getting to what I just said would require lots of sort of step by step by step, but that moonshot or sort of big sort of target destination might give us something to organize around or recommend the state organize around.
Does anyone want to take that forward?
I just say, I mean, it's not super outlandish. The state of Connecticut does something similar with Charter Oaks Academy and their Connecticut online program, which partners with Google and offers that to Connecticut residents. So it's not, it's not cheap, but it's not ludicrous.
Others?
I'll just quickly say one more thing. On the education front, we could enlist each other, right? Every employer could have a part to play in upskilling their workforce. Every K-12 school could have an AI for all agenda. All government agencies, that all of us that are in the business of education, the humane system, the community college system, obviously. But it would be a way of galvanizing and having the conversation in every constituency. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but and mobilize partners to help deliver it, in the same way that Usama described the Bangor Saving example. Bangor Savings is investing in AI education for every one of their employees right now. And what if every Maine company had a charge and an opportunity to do that? How far could we get? How fast could we get there?
Interesting.
So Mary, I'm going to say that's a bold idea and something that I think we would might want to sort of put on a sideboard to revisit as a strategy and come back to. You and I have the responsibility of also shepherding this group to completion on time. So I'm going to ask Scott for a quick update on where we're going next, and then we'll bring this to conclusion until our next meeting. Is that fair?
Great.
President Ziegler, I'm going to jump in for Scott here since he is in a parking garage outside of the Boston Children's Museum. So I'm going to help figure this out here. I just wanted to take exactly the thread that we're having here about guiding our next sort of the work of this task force into the rest of our time together. We have pulled together a list of questions you can see up here in a survey format that we're going to distribute out following this meeting, where we would love to document exactly the kinds of ideas that have been sort of raised here in our discussion. Hopefully this will take no longer than 15 minutes. Each of these is open-ended. Each of these, it's optional here. But I'll keep an eye on the clock just quickly. I'm not going to read every word here, but you can sort of see this is an opportunity for us to arm the co-chairs and arm the rest of you with sort of some information on what and consensus on what the group might be wanting to dig in on over the next few months here. So please keep an eye out for an email from me following this conversation this afternoon. We are hoping that we can get responses back by Monday, the 24th of February. I know this coming week is busy for a lot of people with school vacations and other reasons. So hopefully by the 24th we can have those results back. With that, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I'll turn it over to President Ziegler to take us out.
Thank you. Excuse me. So we are right on time here. Appreciate your participation and the intensity of your thought. This is a big subject. Go big, go narrow. The policy implications and the security implications are all things that we need to consider. So please do respond to the survey as it comes out. That will help us advance our work. And again, I'm going to keep you focused on the fact that we did move our next meeting. It will be Friday, March 13th. And I think that's a Friday, but it will be March 13th. Between 2 and 4 o'clock. So don't want you to miss that as we advance the meeting and the content. Deanne, if there's anything else, let us know that. Otherwise, we're going to go on to the rest of our day, look for the survey, and come back together in mid-March.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you very much.